Hello and welcome to this May 28th issue of Future of XYZ, Season 8, Episode 11, with my dear friend and mentor, Karen Korellis Reuther. Karen, thank you so much for being here on Future of XYZ.
Lisa, it is so good to see you, and I've been so looking forward to this conversation.
Well, you and me both, because we're talking today about a subject that is close to both of our hearts, except that you ended up doing a fellowship and studying it in depth, and now have a book coming out next month with HarperCollins called Man-Made. And we're talking today about the future of man-made. Karen, you've been a designer for over 40 years. You were included in that time as the creative director or as the creative executive at both Nike and Reebok. You're a popular guest lecturer and sought after public speaker. Now on the faculty at Harvard's Graduate School of Design, known as the GSD, for anyone who knows, where you teach in their master's in design engineering program. And I'm really excited to talk about the future of man-made. This book, as I mentioned, and people, it's available for pre-order. This is coming out on May 28th. The book will come out on July 7th, so pre-order it now. But I'm really curious, just even to start, which is, of course, as we always start every question, how do we define man-made in the context of today's conversation?
Lisa, we're going to define man-made as how we designed a world that leaves women out and how we can make it right. So we are living in a world that is primarily designed by men for men. And that is how we're going to talk about man-made today.
Wow. And that is not, I mean, obviously Future of XYZ now is presented by IF Design, where you're a jury chairperson, also on the board of the newly founded IF Design Academy. I'm the U.S. Managing Director and Global Head of Sustainability and Impact. You actually are the person who brought me into the organization, and IF is our presenter of Future of XYZ. So one might think that this is a design-led conversation, but you actually wrote Man-Made for all audiences to recognize the implicit bias in the built environment, not only obviously architecture, but everything that surrounds us. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It's for consumers, it's for designers, and it's for leaders of organizations and businesses. So we think about it in the way of what we put on our body, what we use, and what we surround our bodies with. So as an industrial designer, my heart and my head goes directly to product design. But the book also includes so many examples from public spaces and architecture, also engineering, and many of the professions that really have continued to struggle to employ enough women.
The book subtitle, so the book is called Man-Made, and the subtitle is How We Designed a World That Leaves Women Out and How We Can Make It Right. Exposes, as you just said, this built world's most dangerous blind spots. And you purport in Man-Made that man-made is not a grievance. In fact, it's a blueprint that draws on research-backed insights, market analysis, and expertise from leading designers, engineers, economists, and executives that provides a compelling case that intentional design isn't just an ethical imperative, but is also a massively untapped economic opportunity.
Absolutely.
It may seem like a strange place to start this conversation, given that it is design focused, but I actually am really curious about that latter part, Karen. I want to explore the business opportunity piece of this.
Well, think about this. So women represent half the planet, right? There are 4 billion women on the planet. And as we look to design for our experiences and our products, we really have to consider their bodies, the bodies of 4 billion women. I think when you have the chance to really consider gender diversity in design so that we have women at the design table and design for gender diversity, in both cases, I believe you can bank on women.
I love that. It's the name of your forthcoming book But it's also simply the way we humans talk about what man has made, right? And for the people who are listening and can't see, I'm putting big air quotes around the man, what humans make. And this is all the products, all the packaging, all the digital communications, the signage, the building, the kids' toys, the cars, the beauty products, so much more. It's pretty much everything, right? I mean, this is what we at IF also talk about as design. Like it's pretty much everything. How did we get here that it's man-made?
Well, let's think about this. So I'm going to give you examples of 3 professions: industrial design, architecture, and mechanical engineering. So in industrial design, we're graduating equal numbers of men and women, but but we only represent 18% of the designers in practice in the US are industrial designers. Only 11% are leaders. In architecture, the number is about 25% of licensed architects are women. And in mechanical engineering, it's closer to 12 or 13%. So this is where the design is happening. And I think what also has happened is that when you don't have enough women at the table, and it's not intentional, sometimes you can forget that women exist. So as we start to design, I work on a continuum from insulting to deadly. So it can be insulting, like a pair of sneakers that's designed for the anatomy of a man's foot that is a rectangle versus a woman's foot that's a triangle. And that we often say shrink it and pink it, right? It's a saying that I have never liked, but it really does speak to the insulting aspect of it. We move to expensive, right? Where, I was looking at a girl's batting helmet, in baseball. And the pink one was 30% more than the black and the blue one. And it wasn't because it protected her precious head more, which is on a different neck proportion to her head. And we could talk about all those details, but it was because it was pink. Uncomfortable. There are so many, many examples just where, from if you remember, like if you look at police women, the pants they wear, right? It's just plain uncomfortable. Also insulting, I think, in many ways. Dangerous starts to get into pelvic fractures, right? And ACL injuries and public spaces and the way they're designed and lighting. And then deadly is not just what we've heard a lot about, the crash test dummies recently, but Lisa, it's also CPR, right? So 14% more women die of not receiving bystander CPR than men. And it's primarily because we don't train on female mannequins.
Right. With the breasts. I mean, that's the only major difference. I mean, of
with
mannequins.
Breasts. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Interesting, Karen, because, you and I both share a very similar world of what I'd call the intersection of, feminist advocacy, equity, conscious capitalism, branding, and design, right?
Absolutely. Just to name a few.
Just a few,
Just a couple of things we share. Yeah.
You and I are both heavily engaged there. And this book of yours calls this out. And the design for women, as you just said, the shrink it and pink it insult, the pink tax expense, the default discomfort, the dangerousness. But I remember when we first started talking about, it wasn't even a book at the time. No. It was just a thought that you were having. And you talked about surgeons specifically, like female surgeons, where the scalpel is not designed for the female hand. And actually the beds that people are like having surgery on don't come to like certain levels and everything. So you had female surgeons who were having to like wrap gloves that didn't fit around their hands, around scalpels that didn't fit, standing on stools to fit the ladder that like actually didn't fit. Like, this isn't just dangerous for them or deadly for them. There are real repercussions that block females from being successful in their métier, as we say in French, but in their profession.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I'm really happy you brought up the example of the surgeon, and it really was something. I spoke to a surgeon at Mass General, a neurosurgeon, very early on when I was first starting to research the topic. And I want to start the conversation, Lisa, with the fact that female surgeons have a higher success rate than male surgeons in their patient recovery. And so I want to start with that first. So even though, right, they have so many challenges in the built world, an operating table that doesn't go low enough that a neurosurgeon has to stand on a stool for 8 hours to perform brain surgery. And what she is more concerned about, ultimately is she's going to perform that surgery. She's done it 1,000 times, but she's thinking, am I going to get repetitive stress injuries? Am I going to need to insure myself for back injury that's going to take me out of the game sooner than it will my male counterpart?
Wow. Karen, I mean, these crash test dummies, we just talked about, our CPR dummies. I mean, for Gen Xer like myself, like the 80s TV was overrun with those crash test dummies, right? And there wasn't a moment. I mean, I was aware that they were men. I was aware already as a kid, but you didn't ask a question of like, well, why are they men? You just were aware that they were men, and you thought maybe that was a little weird, but you were like, it's a choice, right? It was a creative choice somehow. Like, we grew up with this, and it kind of reinforced gender discrimination as a norm before we even had language for it. But I guess my question is this simply the most obvious and egregious example of this kind of gender biased design? Or are there bigger or more obvious even pieces of evidence that you came across in researching this book?
I came across a lot of examples and evidence. What I want to say, though, is I think when you mention that growing up, and we're all familiar with crash test dummies, most of us are, the fight for feminism was a very long fight. And it got us many, many things. It got us the right to vote. It got us the right to work in the professions we wanted to, right? We're still working on equal pay, but it has made a lot of progress. What feminism, I believe, did also, though, was to mask our differences, to put our differences in the shadows. And that's why we accepted the crash test dummies as we saw it, because we really believed and bought the language that we're all equal. And, our bodies are different. Our bodies start to differ from puberty on, and they never get closer than they were as when we were children. So I think part of that, acceptance, or just getting used to it, right? Or we're used to living in a man-made world. We haven't seen it any other way, was because we minimized the differences in our bodies, right? Our biomechanics, the way we're made, the way our bodies are designed.
Totally true. Totally true. Karen, I mean, we started your 25-year career in the sportswear industry. You were the vice president of creative direction and innovation at Reebok. We did not cross over there, but we have people in common, which is so wild and crazy to me. And you served as the global creative director at Nike for 12 years. So in this 25-year career in the sportswear, I'm just curious, because I mean, I have my own experience, obviously, as both a sports woman, but also as someone, an executive in that industry. Also, what did you learn in those years in the sportswear industry about gender and design?
Well, I think for me, I was a pre-Title IX, right? So you're Gen X, I'm a boomer. I was a pre-Title IX sports-loving woman.
You have to say what Title IX is for all of our international listeners.
Yes, Title IX was the moment where it became law that equal funding would be provided to both men and women at the collegiate level. And it was the first time that there were organized sports for women. So I was a pre-Title IX who loved sports, loved cars, came from the Midwest, And, you know, being able to work as a design director first and then a creative director at the largest sports brand in the world was quite amazing. But you really understand that we are designing to a male normal, right? It's a male average. It's the average body of a man. And there were times your head is down and you're working at such a fast pace, you're not even sure if you're asking the right questions. Like, is this shoe the right shoe for her? Right? Is this sport the right sport for her? Are we protecting her body in the same way we're protecting the male body? So I think in that way, I'm hoping the book is going to raise our awareness for all of this. So we ask the right questions, because I believe I sat at tables and may not have had always the right questions. I also think that there just aren't enough women yet in not only the sport industry, but in many industries that get us to the built world that we live in right now. And so I think that being a only in a room or being a first in the room, you're often speaking as a creative, which could be a voice that's a little bit different in industry. You're speaking as a woman that is also a little bit different in the industry. Oftentimes, I think and maybe even now, I think even now, it just stacks up. It just stacks up that your voice isn't heard at the same level. You may not have the confidence to ask the questions that should be asked. But I do know that we've been measuring against a male average for decades, probably close to a century. And that hasn't changed very much at all.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I studied political science in my undergraduate degree, and I wrote a thesis on identity politics, which people always like, what's that? And it's like, besides many things, it laddered into my career in fashion as self-expression, the creative self-expression. What you're describing is having a different voice.
Yes.
But I think that there's this philosophy, or a theory, if you will, in political and social philosophy that addresses implicit bias and majority bias, right? And in the case of gender, it suggests largely that if you are a man, you unconsciously take for granted that seamless fit and safety and norms allow for your ease and sense of well-being. And that leaves you unaware of the ways in which these norms and experiences don't include others, meaning women and non-binary.
Yeah.
Right? Historically, strictly women, but of course, non-binary as well. Can you provide any examples, Karen, of where this came across in the research, where it's true, the results, but also maybe where you surprised someone by pointing out their own implicit blind spot that they weren't even aware of until you had this conversation?
The point you raise about men is it's absolutely true. They've never known it any other way, right? The world has always fit them, and they've
especially white men,
and they've never had a reason to question it. I think where I want to make the biggest point, and I don't know, just in a conversation, if you ask me, what is the one thing I would just say? One size never fits all. And that includes other men, right? So we uncovered studies that the Air Force did following World War II around pilots. And a man by the name of Gilbert Daniels measured over 4,300 pilots because they wanted him to find the average pilot so that they could design the cockpit around that pilot. And I think it was in 1955, Lisa, he said, there is no average.
That's amazing.
And so we have known this, but even as a designer, I was designing to Henry Dreyfuss's The Measure of Man, right? And I think in 1993, which may sound like a long time ago to many people, I was 10 years into my career at that point, a little bit more. Finally, the book came out, The Measure of Man and Woman, right?
Yeah.
So, this knowledge has been around, but it is so, you will love this. So you probably read Cass Sunstein and Nudge, the book Nudge, and the idea of social norms and social facts, right? And so even if something is a fact that there is no average, there is no average. If we believe there's an average, we'll continue to design for that average. And I think that has been the biggest sort of aha for me, is that we've been designing to a normal that never exists. And even when we knew it didn't exist, it still felt right enough that we believed it.
Well, it's convenient.
It's convenient. Yeah. Well, that's a great way to look at it. I mean, it would be convenient now, especially after, my book comes out and there's been conversations about this. To believe it going forward would be a bit irresponsible, don't you think?
For sure. And what one of the takeaways, because your book's actually, I was privileged to see an advanced copy. One of the things that I think is really interesting is it isn't preachy at all. It's very, very research focused. It's hard to deny any of the examples you give. One of the things that you outline are the typical questions of a design brief, and any of us in any design related field have written a design brief, whether that's for a product or package or a campaign or whatever else, right? And this typical design brief addresses questions that are very, who's your audience? What's the purpose? And they're great questions. I love writing a design brief because when you write them well, the outcome is fantastic. But you argue in your book that actually we have to move away from the typical, right? And address potential blind spots, potential biases, assumptions, and the other factors that create this risk of exclusion. And to your point of danger and even death, of harm, right? Potential harm, not only to the wearer, the user, but also to the end user, right? In the case of a firefighter who can't hold her pants up and then can't get to them, right?
Right.
In your opinion, Karen, and now an expert opinion in this matter, is this a challenge that needs to be tackled across the entire design industry, or is this like segmented and specific?
I think it needs to be tackled across the design industry because, how many of us, so you've written briefs and I've received briefs as a designer, right? And I receive bad briefs. And from a bad brief comes a bad product. I think we have to really focus, and maybe you can teach this course with me. Maybe it's something to consider, is writing an amazing brief, right? And how a designer can push back on the brief, not to accept the brief, how the brief writer should be able to look at a brief, and you mentioned it, very often it's kind of a legacy, right? The legacy brief. It just sort of builds off of the brief that was written before, and that was built off the brief that was written before. And every time we look in the rearview mirror for anything, and that includes AI, if we're looking into the rearview mirror, if we're looking at history, that history is male. And so we have to even question our own. So the brief, right? First thing I do is like, who's not here? Like, who's not here at the table as I start to write the brief? And whoever's missing, get up and go find them, right? And bring them to the table. Who can the brief, as you mentioned, who can it harm? Who is it leaving out, right? Who might it help if we just tweak it a little bit, right? So as you frame the brief, I think brief writing should be a beautiful art in itself and something that's taught deeply. Can you teach deeply?
I think it should be taught deeply. I totally agree with this. And we actually opened, if you can believe it, I don't even know if you know this as a jury chairperson, last year in branding and communications, we opened a category in the IS Design Award that was writing for design. And briefs were one of the things. Now, we got 0 entries because we didn't advertise it, but it's fascinating because it is actually a point of excellence unto itself.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I figured
it's one of those things.
Yeah. And I always say that, designers who I've worked with, designers who have worked for me will come back and say, this is a terrible brief. can we go back to the brief writer and ask them to rewrite it?
Yeah.
And I always say, let's rewrite it first and then go back to the brief writer and have a conversation, right?
It's great.
Brief writing is design too.
Yeah, as everything is. You started to talk about going backwards, and we don't have a huge amount of time, Karen, but I love that. Without us trying, I think this is why you and I have always gotten along. But without us trying, it's following a very natural rhythm. The next question I wanted to talk to actually is, you talk about something in the book called backcasting.
Yes.
And as a longtime futurist or self-declared futurist who just last month, 2 episodes ago, hosted the Future of Foresight, time to the release of the 5th annual IF Design Trend Report, I really appreciate this argument for backcasting, which you call for when challenges are, and I'm quoting you in the book, challenges are complex and when present practices themselves are part of the problem. You say that unlike forecasting, which predicts the future based on current trends and moves forward from what's known, backcasting begins with envisioning a desired future and moves backward from there, step by step, to determine what actions, processes, and policies are required to reach it. Do you think that in the world of man-made, backcasting is now our only way to the future?
Well, I have a sense of urgency about these things, right? And when I realized that after being a designer for 40 years, my eyes were opened to the level of inequity that there was in the built world. So I do think backcasting gets us there quicker, and it gets us there maybe in a way that we get there together a bit, right? So I do think, I'm hesitant to say it might be the only way, but I think if you want to supercharge and you want to get to something a little quicker, backcasting is a really great way to do it. Let me I'll play this out to you, right? Backcasting, right? Name the problem. Hopefully after people read this book, right? It's the built world was designed around a male body. That's it, right? Like, we don't have to have the discussion anymore. Now backcasting says we're going to design for a range of human bodies, not just one type.
It's pretty amazing.
And then we reframe our values, right? That inclusion by design isn't an accommodation, it's a human right. And then we work back from there versus how do we get there step by step? How do I change one aspect, or what is happening in the world that is going to support, my argument that the world has been designed by men for men? That would be forecasting, right? What do I see coming in the future that's going to help me build my argument? Maybe I'm a little impatient. I just want to go all the way to the end and just say the world is built for men, that we have to change it.
I mean, look, I think many of us feel that way. And I think there's a lot of loud voices, which probably has something to do with the friction in the world right now between classic masculine archetypes and everything that is quote unquote feminine archetype. And it's not just about women, right?
Right.
You at Harvard have founded an event series called Inclusion by Design, which brings together students and faculty and practitioners who share a commitment to design a world that is quote unquote safe, hospitable, and inclusive for all. These are quote unquote dangerous words in 2026 in current Western administrations. Yet at the same time, I've received that advanced copy of Man-Made, and you are advocating that investing in design that is crafted for women should be the new status quo. What do you think this really practically means in your impatience, Karen?
Well, I realize the challenges that we're under, and I realize the challenges that we face in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Where I live, where my agency as a designer is in the built world, and it is really, really difficult to challenge that the built world has not been built for women. So it's not a philosophy, it's a measurement. right? Our hands are different. Our neck musculature is different. Our pelvic area is different. The angle between our hips to our knees to our ankles are different. Our bodies, I just writing an article for Time about the thermostat wars, like when you go in and women are freezing, right? And
the office problem.
The office, the return to the office. And, that is a physical, it's not, it's a physical issue, right? Our bodies insulate heat. Men are more like furnaces, right? So, we experience the world differently physically. And that is a very, very difficult argument, or it's very hard to push back on that, I believe.
For sure.
It's Karen, not a philosophy.
I'm going to jump to the last question, but I do want to give you a chance. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you want to touch on?
There's one thing. I do believe we can all do something about this, right? So as we've spent some time talking about what we can do as designers and on the business side, but if you're a consumer and you're noticing that the built world isn't built for you, something is wrong. Like, this is a point to use, our social media to insist, to make it a point to say that this is not working. Of course, if you're a designer, you have the power to invent, right? You have the power to put pencil to paper and change the outcome. And, if you're a leader, you can really invest, build a talent pipeline. Don't just build the talent pipeline, empower, advocate, and promote women. Women won't forget that women exist. And then last is to bank on women.
I love that. I love that. So I guess it may T-bone perfectly. Sorry, going back to crash test dummies. It may T-bone directly into the last question, which is always the same on every episode. Karen, what's your greatest hope for the future of man-made in, let's call it 25 years, so 2050?
So I'm going to go back first, right? We have to study history to make history. So as the U.S. celebrates their 250th birthday this year, I want to recall the words of Abigail Adams that she wrote to her husband shortly before the publishing of the Declaration of Independence. And Abigail Adams said, "I desire that you remember the ladies." And so my wish is, everybody, please remember the ladies.
It's pretty powerful. Karen Korellis Reuther, author, member of the faculty at Harvard's Graduate School of Design, and former creative director at both NIKE and Reebok, and my dear friend and IF chairperson. Thank you so much for joining us on Future of XYZ today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa. This has been a wonderful conversation.
For everyone watching, you can listen anywhere you get your favorite podcasts, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review so others can find us. If you're listening and you didn't know you can watch on YouTube, please check it out. You can learn more at ifdesign.com/XYZ for all links. And I would also just say, go online and get Man Made by Karen Reuther. It is available from Harper Business Press and everywhere you get your favorite books. I'm not going to mention names, but it's everywhere, your local bookstore or any of the big online retailers. So thank you again. Thanks for listening. We will see you in 2 weeks' time. Karen, congrats on this wonderful achievement.
Thanks, Lisa.